So today, we're diving into a source that paints a pretty wild picture. It documents a series of chaotic, high-stakes events unfolding inside the U.S. administration, all apparently happening at a dizzying speed.
And wow, this quote from the source really just lays it all out there, doesn't it? It suggests this sense of urgency, this frantic grab is what's driving everything we're about to unpack. This is the central idea we're going to follow.
So the source is basically telling us about a few major crises all happening at once. It's a lot. To make sense of it all, we're going to break it down into three big themes: a really controversial foreign policy plan, a radical new push on domestic policy, and a whole string of actions that just seem to challenge all the established norms.
Okay, first up, let's talk foreign policy. The source gets into the details of a back-channel negotiation to end the war in Ukraine. And as you're about to see, the way this was reportedly handled has set off some major alarm bells.
Right, so the key thing to understand here is that this was not your normal, everyday diplomacy. The source claims that the U.S. State Department, the actual agency that's supposed to handle this stuff, was totally left in the dark during the initial talks.
And then you look at who was in the room: a special envoy, the president's son-in-law, and a sanctioned ally of Vladimir Putin. I mean, this is not the usual cast of characters you'd expect to be hammering out a major international peace treaty. It really highlights just how unusual this whole back channel was.
So what was actually on the table? Well, according to the source, the terms were pretty staggering. The U.S. would recognize Russia's annexation of huge chunks of Ukraine, Ukraine would be permanently barred from joining NATO, and its military would be shrunk down. This was, for all intents and purposes, Russia's wish list, and it was put together with basically zero initial input from Ukraine or our European allies. And just when you think it can't get any more complicated, a Wall Street Journal report drops another bombshell. It alleges a huge motivation behind this whole plan was to open the door for U.S. businessmen to get their hands on massive energy and mineral deals, which suggests there was a pretty powerful financial angle to all of this.
All right, so while all of that is going on with Ukraine, the source says there's this huge, dramatic shift happening back at home. It was kicked off by a shooting incident in D.C. and then blown up by a series of really intense social media posts.
To really get what's happening, you have to see how quickly this all went down. First, there's a court ruling about the National Guard. Then, a violent incident involving those Guard members. And then, boom, on Thanksgiving night, you get this flood of social media posts tying it all together and calling for some really extreme action.
And this is where the source points out a really jarring contrast. On the one hand, you have the actual suspect, a man who reportedly worked for the CIA and went through the asylum process. And on the other hand, you have this really broad, sweeping claim about unvetted and unchecked people pouring in. But this right here, reverse migration, this is the phrase that really signals a massive, radical policy change. We're not talking about reforming immigration anymore. We're talking about actively reversing it, a call for the mass removal of people who are already here.
The posts also threw around this word denaturalization, which means revoking someone's citizenship after they've already earned it. And we really need to pause on that for a second, because it's a huge deal. It is incredibly rare in American history. To suggest using it on a large scale would basically change the entire meaning of American citizenship.
All right, so that brings us to our third and final theme from the source, this pattern of just bypassing the usual rules and laws. Let's run through a few examples that all reportedly happened in this same crazy, frantic period.
First up, there's this report from the Washington Post about an alleged order from the Secretary of Defense to kill everybody. And that included survivors in the water after a strike. A former military lawyer apparently called this a potential war crime or just straight-up murder.
Next up, a full pardon for the former president of Honduras, a guy convicted of working with cartels to ship 400 tons of cocaine into the U.S. The source points out the wild contradiction here, since the administration was supposedly fighting narco-terrorism to justify other military actions. And to round it out, the FBI reportedly starts investigating 6 lawmakers. Now, what did they do? They made a video reminding U.S. troops of their legal duty to refuse unlawful orders. But according to the source, this act was twisted and reframed as sedition, a crime that's punishable by death. Okay, so let's just take a step back. We've got this foreign policy move, this intense domestic rhetoric, and these really aggressive executive actions. The big question is, are these just random, chaotic events, or is there a pattern here?
Well, the source argues that yes, there is absolutely a pattern of bypassing the official channels, using crises to push for radical change, challenging legal and military rules, and pursuing actions that might have a financial benefit, all while sending completely mixed messages on things like crime. Every event we just talked about fits right into these boxes.
So in the end, what this source leaves us with is a picture of an executive branch that seems to be acting with incredible speed, pushing against every boundary it can find. It doesn't give us the answer, but it leaves us with the most important question of all. What are the consequences when you push those boundaries so far, so fast?